Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shawn Jimenez. I'm a junior at Bowdoin College, and I stand here in my unofficial capacity as a member of the Human, Civil Rights, and Social Justice Committee of the Maine Education Association and the co-chair of the Youth Advisory Board of the National Alliance on Mental Illness Chapter of Maine, to welcome you to a time of community grief, support, and calls to action. 1 week ago today, a mass shooting at Brown University took the lives of 2 students, Mukhammad Aziz Umurzokov, 18 years old, and Ella Cook, 19 years old, and injured 9 others. This tragedy occurred during a review session for Principles of Economics, an introductory level course primarily filled with underclassmen, where students were prepping to take their final exams. Ella, a sophomore from Mountain Brook, Alabama, was a member of the sorority Alpha Chi Omega, vice president of the Republican Club at Brown, parishioner of the Cathedral Church of the Advent in Birmingham, Alabama, and a prospective French and Francophone studies concentrator. Her peers at Brown described her as loyal, courageous, intelligent, and deeply kind. Mukhammad, a freshman Uzbek American student from Midlothian, Virginia, was planning on concentrating in biochemistry and molecular biology in hopes of becoming a neurosurgeon, a testament, his sister says, to an unwavering commitment of uplifting others. Touching the lives of so many in a short period of time, his peers at Brown described him as charismatic, confident, intelligent, and compassionate. I would now like to call up Reverend Alicia Vèlez Stewart, pastor of the Brunswick United Methodist Church, to lead a candlelight vigil of solidarity, mourning, courage, commitment, and hope.
Thank you very much, Shawn, and thank you to all of you for being present during this time and coming together as a community in solidarity. Friends, I wish to invite you into this time together, and I invite you to proclaim with me. Please repeat after me. In the quiet, we gather ourselves.
We gather ourselves.
In the quiet, we gather one another.
We gather one another.
And from this shared silence, we begin. And I thank you for being here today as we gather in solidarity with the students, faculty, staff, and families of Brown University as they grieve the senseless loss of life and the passing of students Mukhammad and Ella. We come to mourn alongside them, to grieve the loss of life due to violence, and to hold one another in the weight of fear and sorrow and unanswered questions. The truth is, we gather because violence should never be normalized. We gather because grief should also never be carried alone. And we gather because showing up is itself an act of resistance. As writer and cultural critic Bell Hooks reminds us, solidarity is not the same as support. Solidarity requires sustained, ongoing commitment. And this afternoon, our presence here is that commitment. Because when words feel insufficient, we begin not with answers, but with presence. And so we light this first candle as a sign of solidarity, to say to the Brown University community and to all communities impacted by gun violence, you are not alone. Your grief is seen, your fear is named, and your lives matter. To stand in solidarity is to allow grief its full voice. And so we light this second candle from the first. This candle is a candle of mourning. Solidarity does not hurry sorrow along. It does not explain it away, and it does not turn aside. And so we light this candle in mourning for lives taken too soon, for futures interrupted, for the deep ache that violence always leaves behind. And so now I invite you to hold in the silence the names of those we have lost, and to hold in our hearts all who carry grief this day. As we sit together in grief, we are reminded that mourning alone is not the end of the story. Even and especially in moments like this, we are called to imagine what kind of world we can build together. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called this vision of what could be the beloved community. For Dr. King, the beloved community was not sentimental or passive or naive. It was a vision of a world transformed, and transformed not simply by laws or policies, but by a radical reordering of how we live with one another. The beloved community is a society where justice replaces violence, where conflict is addressed through nonviolence, where the dignity of every person is protected, and not because we are the same, but because we are bound together by the human experience. Dr. King believed our lives are interdependent, that harm done to one community wounds us all, and that peace is not merely the absence of violence, but the very presence of justice, safety, and yes, a shared responsibility. This is a vision that matters deeply today. In a world where fear isolates us, where violence threatens to define the future, where grief tempts us into despair, the beloved community calls us to another way. And so as we name the kind of community together we seek to become today, I invite you to respond with the words, we become a beloved community.
We become a beloved community.
When we stand with those who are grieving, when we refuse to let them mourn alone, and when we choose compassion over indifference, we become a beloved community. When we commit to learning, listening, and telling the truth, especially when it challenges our comfort or our assumptions, we become a beloved community. When we reject fear as our guiding force, when we refuse violence as inevitable, when we choose love as an act of resistance and courage, we become a beloved community. Yet even beloved communities experience grief. And grief does not only break our hearts, it also serves to clarify them. When we allow ourselves to feel the weight of what has been lost, we begin to understand what truly matters, what truly must be protected, and what kind of world we cannot and will not accept. It is from this place of grief, not beyond it, that we begin to name how we will live. And so we light this third candle as a sign of our commitment to do no harm. We refuse a future where violence is predictable and expected. We refuse to grow numb. We refuse to accept despair as inevitable. And so we light this candle as a declaration of commitment to do no harm, to seek safety for all, and to work toward a world where people can thrive, not merely survive. But commitment is hard. Commitment, when taken seriously, always asks more of us. It always asks something of us. It calls us beyond comfort and into responsibility. And so this fourth candle we light for courage. The courage to speak when silence is easier. The courage to act when change feels too slow. The courage to show up even when we are weary. This candle reminds us that healing is not solitary but communal work, and that justice, care, and safety are responsibilities that we all share, regardless of where we are coming from or where we are heading toward. It is important. Commitment is important, and it is heavy. Even with all that we carry, grief, commitment, responsibility, resolve, with all that we carry, we still have hope for the future. We dare to hope. And so we light this fifth candle for hope. A hope that is not shallow, a hope that does not ignore pain, but a resilient hope, rooted in memory, love, and determination. This candle proclaims that another world is possible, that another world is worth working toward, that another world is worth hoping for. But hope does not remain abstract. Hope is not a fleeting thing, but hope is something that asks to be carried. Today, our vigil does not mean lighting individual flames that we will simply hold for a moment and then blow out at the end of our time together. Instead, we offer you blue votive lights, lights that you are invited to take with you. These blue lights come from the tradition of Blue Christmas, which reminds us that not all hope arrives in blazing glory. Sometimes hope arrives quietly, especially when we feel like we are in the midst of a long night. Blue is the color of grief. It is a color of lament. But it is also a color of depth, a color of faithfulness, and yes, a color of resistance and resilience. And so you are invited to take these lights as a reminder that the work continues beyond this vigil. We take these lights because we seek to bring light into the broken places of the world, knowing that the cracks are where the light is most able to shine through. And so you are invited, as you feel ready, to come forward and take a blue votive. As you take one, hold it for a moment. Let it represent the lives that we mourn, the communities that we stand beside, and the responsibility that we carry to shine light into the shadows. Please come forward as you feel called. As you receive your light, as you take it back to your seat, note that each pinpoint of light grows. As we add it to the lights of others, we cannot help but be able to see more clearly. So may these lights remind us that even in grief, we are not powerless. May they remind us that shining light does not require perfection, perfection or perfect answers, but perfect presence alone. May they remind us that fear and violence will never have the final word. Carry this light. Be this light. And when the world feels swallowed in shadow, may this candle remind you that the light is already in your hands.
Thank you so much, Reverend Alicia. It is now my great privilege to welcome my dear friend, Magnus Gehrke, sophomore at Brown University studying biochemistry, to the podium to reflect upon this evening.
My name is Magnus Gehrke, and I'm a sophomore at Brown University. I'm studying biochemistry and molecular biology. And it has been 1 week since I arrived back to my dorm from the library where I had been cramming for my final exams, when I received a text alert telling me that there was an active shooter just minutes away in the Barristan Valley Engineering Building. My roommate and I sat anxiously in our room on the floor for almost 14 hours. We had no food. We were texting everybody that we knew frantically to make sure that they were okay. And we tried to steal moments of sleep through the sounds of sirens and helicopter blades overhead. Our minds raced not only with the fear that someone could arrive at our door at any moment, but also with the unbearable question of which of our classmates had been murdered. The next day, I drove up to Maine to be with my family, and it was here that I learned the names of the 2 students we lost. Mukhammad was a bright freshman just finishing his very first semester away from home, and Ella was a passionate student, a sophomore like me, who was in my orientation group and was one of the first faces that I recognized around campus. Another chilling reality is that for at least 2 of my peers, including one of my friends, this was not their first school shooting. On top of this tragedy occurred on the eve of the anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting. If these facts do not make it abundantly clear, I'll say it plainly, the time for action is now. We gather here today in grief and remembrance, but also in hope and determination. Despite the tragic events of last Saturday, I saw the Brown community come together in unprecedented ways to unite against gun violence. We honor Ella and Mukhammad not only by celebrating their lives and mourning their loss, but by using their stories to fuel a future where students do not have to fear for their safety while trying to learn, grow, and make the world a better place. May we leave here today with a fierce determination that no more names are added to that list. May we reject a society that keeps us living in fear and instead choose one where we make our voices heard and where we act. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Magnus. It's now my pleasure to call up Nacole Palmer, the Executive Director of the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, to reflect upon this moment.
Good afternoon. My name is Nacole Palmer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, a statewide coalition of advocates working to pass common sense gun laws and save lives in Maine, including our most recent victories with the red flag law of question 2 at the ballot, and the welcome news just last night that the governor will allow the ghost guns ban that we helped pass this spring to go into law without our signature. Thank you so much for having me here today to remember and honor Ella and Mukhammad. It is an honor to join you and inspiring as always to see action on this issue from students like the incredible Shawn Jimenez and Lianna Holden, and young adults who know too well the horrors of gun violence in our schools and our communities. I want to tell you about someone, a college student named Mia. Last week, I attended Washington, D.C. on the 13th anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting. We had the honor in that service of hearing Mia sing Imagine. It was heart-rendingly beautiful, and it moved me to tears. I learned that night that Mia is a survivor of the 2019 Saugus High School shooting in California. Her best friend, who was standing next to her, was shot and killed. And Mia was also shot, but thankfully survived. Then, because Mia is now a student at Brown University, last week she survived yet another shooting at her place of learning. Horrifically, as so many of you students here today know, while Mia's life experience is horrifying, it is emblematic of the experience of too many young people in America. I know there are other Brown students for whom Saturday's tragedy was not their only exposure to gun violence. I'm sure that many of you here today have been exposed to gun violence or real fears of losing your life at school. It's abhorrent and unacceptable. And it's why your leadership on this issue. But the fact that this burden of leadership falls to our youth is a moral failing of the adults in Augusta and DC who have failed to respond to this crisis with action. They should be the ones leading on this. They should take heed of our victory in November when 63% of Mainers turned out in an odd-year election to vote for a red flag law. Mainers demand action on this issue. We demand that our schools, communities, parks, playgrounds, and places of worship be free from the threat of gun violence. We demand that students like you should be focused on learning, not sitting terrified through lockdowns. That moms like me shouldn't have to worry about our kids' safety when we drop them off at school. There is no single policy that will end gun violence, but make no mistake, gun violence is preventable. Our victory in November, while it will save lives, is just part of a toolkit to keep our schools and communities safe. A toolkit that includes policies like permits to purchase firearms, and like safe storage, which Democratic lawmakers in Augusta failed to pass last session, mere weeks after a child found an unsecured handgun and unintentionally killed himself. It was also within weeks of two separate teens in Maine who intentionally committed suicide with unsecured firearms, something that rarely makes headlines, though it is sadly all too common in Maine. The Maine Gun Safety Coalition will continue our work fighting for common sense policies to keep guns out of dangerous hands and save lives. And we are so grateful to have people like Shawn and others leading in their own communities and working alongside us. Additionally, this upcoming election, we will be working to hold Maine politicians accountable and to elect gun safety champions who will listen to the will of the overwhelming majority of Maine voters. And with your help, we will keep winning on this issue and save lives. Thank you so much for your leadership, which fills a vacuum where too many leaders have sadly failed to actually lead. And thank you all for coming here today to remember those lost in yet another senseless act of violence in an American school. Thank you for demanding action and bringing about much needed change rather than waiting for the next tragedy and the next.
Thank you so much, Nacole. It's now my pleasure to invite Shenna Bellows, the Secretary of State of Maine, up to provide some remarks to reflect upon this moment.
Thank you, Shawn. Thank you, Lianna and Magnus, and all the students of Bowdoin for bringing us together in this sacred place to mourn, to grieve, to remember, to honor, and to commit to action. Ella Cook, Mukhammad, Aziz, Umurzokov. Two holes torn in the fabric of the universe. It is up to us to come together, to commit ourselves to sewing back those holes through action. The documents foundational to our democracy are the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the Declaration of Independence, whose 250th anniversary is this year, July 4th, 2026, reads, and I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." These were tragically denied to Ella and to Mukhammad. And true liberty, true happiness, democracy itself is dependent on freedom from fear. But that is not what we have in this moment. That is not what we have had now for over a decade. From the victims of Sandy Hook 13 years ago to the victims of mass tragedy after mass tragedy, month after month, year after year. And the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, what's the First Amendment? Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. But how can you have true freedom of speech and thought and assembly in an era of collective fear during this epidemic of gun violence? So in order to truly be who we are promised to be in the United States of America, to live up to the promise of our founding documents, of our values, we need collective action to end gun violence starting today. And quite frankly, Nacole and the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, they've had courage, and some of us have been working on this for decades. And it felt like we were voices in the wilderness. But in November, 63% of us, our friends and neighbors all across Maine, in a collective action that few thought was possible, voted for the extreme risk protection orders, the red flag law, so that friends and family who knew something was wrong could take action to protect their loved ones in our communities. And this needs to be just the beginning, to build a better future where gun violence is not a predictable and frequent event. We need to support not only mental health for our children, for our communities, and that is extraordinarily important, but we need to do what Representative Poppy Arford right here from Brunswick is doing. We need to get weapons out of our polling places and our public places. We need to follow the policy proposals set forward by the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, the common sense safety proposals that will help us to bring meaning to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, to ensure that every single one of us has that freedom from fear. Because we are in an era of fear, and we are in a time of darkness, but we're also in a season of light. And just as freedom and chaos are contagious, courage is contagious too. So let us take these lights, let us move forward, let us mourn, let us grieve, but let us act to end gun violence in our state and our nation. Thank you.
It's now my great pleasure to call up my friends, Lauren Roussel and Chicha Nimepoinsuko, both juniors at Brown. Lauren's majoring in mathematical physics and education studies, and Chicha is international relations and also within the School of Engineering, electrical engineering, and they're going to come up and give a statement to reflect upon this moment.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here today. Thank you, Shawn, for inviting us and for putting all this together. It means a lot to see so many people here to grieve and to rally behind our community. It's a really difficult time. As Shawn said, my name is Lauren Russell. I'm a junior studying mathematical physics and education studies at Brown. I'm also a Maine native, born and raised. I was actually born in Brunswick at Midcoast Hospital, right down the road. And I grew up in Freeport, going to school K through 12. And one of the reasons that I liked Brown so much was because Providence reminds me of Portland. Whenever my relatives ask about Brown, I always say, it's like if you took Portland and then you shrunk it down to like a third of the size and kept all the people. So I was very nervous before I left for Brown because being someone that has grown up here and always lived here, I've never felt unsafe in my community. But I also never felt unsafe on campus either. So what I really wanted to talk about today was Vèlez and Holden, the building. I echo so many of the things that have already been said about Brown, but I think one perspective that Chicha and I can bring forward is how important the location of Vèlez and Holly is. I had my first ever class at Brown there in 168, which is the stadium-style room that shares a wall with 166, where the shooting occurred. I've had at least 2 classes there in all 5 semesters, sometimes more. I met my boyfriend there. Chicha and I became friends in our lab section there when we both took introductory physics. We actually picked our dorm room for next year so that it would be closer to Vèlez and Holly because we spend so much time there. I work there, I do research there. But I think the non-academic things we do there are even greater. I wish people knew that this attack is so deeply personal to many Brown students because Vèlez and Holly is not just an academic building, it's probably the biggest student hub on campus. By nature of Brown being very old school, there are a lot of buildings at Brown that are very small, but Vèlez and Holly is a huge building. 7 stories, 117 laboratories, 150 offices, 15 classrooms, 29 labs, and 3 lecture halls. So if you need a place to meet, if you need a place to study, Vèlez and Holly is the place for that. And it's been hard to hear criticism about our school and about our building from people who don't know what it's like to have the experiences that we've had there. So much joy associated with that building that has now been taken. There are so many students. I actually know Mia. I talked to Mia after the Lewiston shooting to work through my feelings with her. The TA, Joseph, that was teaching the economics section, I worked with him for 2 years. He's one of my closest friends. I consider him like a brother. And losing that sense of safety, that sense of peace, that sense of happiness in that hub of campus is something that will impact our community for a really long time. And the only way to stop that is to stop the shooting, right? I've heard reporters talk about why aren't there more cameras? Why are the doors open? Like, why are things unlocked? The accountability is for the guns. The only way to stop mass shooting is the shooting. The only way to stop gun violence is to have more regulation on gun laws. And I know that we've now experienced that firsthand. And I'm really happy that everyone is here today to help us in that mission. To close for me, I just wanted to share a quote from Professor Luiero, who is the other person that this shooter took the life of, an MIT professor in physics. He said, failure occurs when we learn nothing from not succeeding. And we've been not succeeding at controlling gun violence for a long time. That is our failure. And I sincerely hope that this time we learned something from it. So thank you. And Chicha.
All right, well, thank you everyone for being here today after such a horrific event. So my name is Chicha. I'm a rising senior at Brown, so I study electrical engineering and international affairs. And I speak on behalf of both of us when I say for 3 years we've called Garrison Holly basically our second home. So it's a space for all of us, all the physics students, all the engineers, and obviously every other member of the community have enjoyed that space. And we've had countless fond memories of the building, and as one that is without a doubt one of the most important buildings on campus. And for many of us, this tragedy didn't happen inside a building and just a building. It happened inside our memories and a lot of things that we considered routine. And as a student, I always knew that gun violence was a possibility, but it felt like something so distant that you feel like wouldn't happen to you until it does, until you see the pain and the loss of your friends and in your community. You see what its true consequences are. And it takes knowing that, somewhere I've talked to my friends until like 5 a.m. is now a crime scene, and a place where I talk to the cafeteria staff about the latest Formula One news is now barred off by tape. And it takes sitting in our dorm room with Lauren with the lights all closed for 14 hours, texting our friends to stay quiet and stay safe, that it all feels too real. So I'm an international student, and Brown was the first place where I've ever felt like a true community because it was so beautiful, because it was so accepting. And Brown taught me what it was like to belong so far away from home. And I can tell you that the experience and the people in Brown University are like anything else in the world I've ever experienced, because everyone was so full of joy and everyone was so full of life. And I think that's why the tragedy cuts so deeply, why all our fingers were shaking as we texted our friends who we knew were inside the building, and why we watched all these press conferences so religiously, trying to find some reason for the tragedy. And maybe what hurts the most is knowing that there is no logic to it whatsoever. Ella, Mukhammad, along with the 9 other injured students and countless others who witnessed this firsthand, did not deserve that. And with the death of the shooter, we will never get the closure we deserve. Grief will not arrive neatly, not for Brown, not for faculty, not for students, not for families, not for anybody. But healing takes time, and it will require so much more than words and soft promises. It needs action. And I see the call for stricter gun regulations not as a political statement, but just as people, individuals, taking a stand. Taking a stand to refuse the classrooms to be a place of fear and to believe that safety should be something that we mourn only after it is already gone. A quote from the Students Demand Action struck me deeply. They say, the students' biggest concern right now should be final exams, not the school shooting. And it is so powerful just because of how simple and how true it is. We deserve good company, long walks, study sessions in the library, leaves changing color in the falls, snowy winters, shopping in malls, stressing out about finals, and laughing until we can't feel our faces. And we deserve all of this without worrying for our lives. And we refuse to accept that this is the cost of being a student in the States. We've just experienced the first-hand pain of lenient gun laws, and we ask on behalf of Brown and the student community all over the country, we ask for more from our politicians, more responsibility, more prevention, and more courage so we have to suffer less. Looking out at everyone who has come today, I'm sure we all want the same thing, compassion and safety. Because one day it might be one of your relatives or one of your family members or who is texting you what no one should ever hear. And this is a direct quote that is said to a mother of a Brown student. Quote says, "There's a live shooting on campus. I'm gonna run. I love you." And finally, we take this time to breathe and to remember together to Ella, to Mukhammad, and to MIT Professor Ulero, we're so sorry. And to Claudia, the shooter, we will not let you define what it means to be a Brown student.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I now have the pleasure of reading a statement that was sent over by Mattie Daughtry, President of the Maine Senate. Thank you for gathering today to honor the lives of Ella Cook and Mukhammad Umurzokov. It is devastating that students today have grown up with this kind of violence as a constant, from Sandy Hook to Lewiston, where 18 lives were lost here in our own state, to now. No one should have to learn how to hide or grieve, especially in places meant for learning, growing, and dreaming. This level of violence is not normal, and it should never be accepted. And yet it continues to happen again and again in our country. The fact that a student at Brown University who survived the Parkland area shooting in 2018 lived again through the mass shooting this past weekend is a stark reminder that gun violence isn't just a statistic. Gun violence is the result of choices, and we have a responsibility to choose action. The victims of this senseless violence and the communities who love them deserve more than thoughts, prayers, and inaction. They deserve our courage and our willingness to choose change. Honoring their lives means listening to our students, standing with our communities, and pushing for real solutions that keep people safe. I am deeply grateful to the students and organizers who have created this space for remembrance and resolve. Your voices matter, your leadership matters, and your insistence on action is exactly how progress will happen. May we leave here not only in mourning, but committed to doing more together. I will now call up Representative Traci Gere, who is the representative for House District 134.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Traci Gere. I represent House District 134 in the Maine Legislature, which is Kennebunkport and coastal Biddeford and Kennebunk. And I am a proud graduate of Brown University, class of '86. We just heard about how Brown is indeed a very special place. And it's where I ended up as a kid, from the ragged edge of the ragged lower edge of the middle class from Pittsburgh. As the granddaughter of steel workers who had immigrated from Yugoslavia, at the time not Croatia, I grew up having the job every morning of hosing the soot off of the back wall of my grandparents' house above the Clairton Coke Works every morning when we lived with them for a number of years because of the economic devastation of the steel industry and the impact it had on our family. So surprisingly, somehow out of all that, I ended up a student at Brown University, but I have a very special place in my heart as well in Maine for all of the recovering mill towns and the communities that are working for a better future and that are facing trauma of their own, as we have seen. And I also have a special place in my heart for young people like Ella and Mukhammad, who carried their own life stories to Brown and who were likely having some of the same experiences I had there, coming, as we also heard just now, from very different places. Things like learning how to think critically and how to develop ideas and hypotheses and support them or refute them with evidence. And learning about people from all different backgrounds and interacting, having debates, and having discussions. And for me, from that experience, I had the chance to graduate. Because of some of the relationships I developed at Brown, I applied to be a Peace Corps volunteer and served in a West African country that subsequently fell into a violent 14-year civil war. I've seen a country and a community where I lived for 2.5 years be torn to shreds when the only solutions become getting a gun and shooting people and that violence feeds on itself endlessly. That's what happens. Mukhammad and Ella will not have the chance to make the contributions that they would have made in their lives. All of us here can help make sure that their young lives and the loss of those young lives were not in vain. As communities all over this country, including right here in Lewiston, have learned, coming together in community is essential to healing and recovery, but also very importantly, to action. Taking action to reach out to those suffering now, and also to combat the scourge that gun violence continues to present in our country. We who remain must work to make sure that community, the word community, means a focus on the things that we have in common. We who remain must make community something that we do, something that we create by having belonging, mutual support, and shared purpose grow amongst us. I thank deeply the organizers of this event for bringing us together to remember Mukhammad and Ella and to share what I hope will be an increased sense of purpose. And I hope that we remember to use this shared experience to fuel action and to reach out to others who may or may not be exactly like us, but to continue to reach out to build more trust and relationship. Just like we saw in the vote that occurred that Nacole talked about earlier, it is possible to move people's minds and hearts, and we must all commit to do that. For those who are affiliated with Brown in some way, we know that the first line of our school song is, "We are ever true to Brown." And let us all who remain commit to being ever true to the memory of Mukhammad and Ella and everyone who testified this for a big event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Gere. I now have the pleasure of calling up another Brown alum and former Speaker of the Maine House, Hannah Pingree, to reflect upon this moment.
Thank you, Shawn, thank you, Lianna, and thank you to everyone who has organized this event. Thank you to those of you who are showing up and being here with us. Who here did graduate from Brown? Stand up. I know there are quite a few of you. I see some sweatshirts out there. Or who's at Brown now? A few of you. So thank you all for coming to stand in solidarity with us at an incredibly heartbreaking time. I'm struck by the images of Mukhammad and Ella and also the 9 students who were injured in this attack. I think we are all here feeling grief, feeling sadness. I know we feel anger for what has been taken from us. And I think we're here also with a spirit of urgency. So I had the opportunity last summer to interview a guy named David Hogg, and you've probably heard of David Hogg. I think he's helped drive this organization. So he's a guy in his mid-20s. I interviewed him at College of the Atlantic, sort of about some of his political activism. And I was reading his resume before I interviewed him, and I think you all know he experienced the Parkland shooting at his school in Florida. He and his sister both survived that attack and then went on to organize the largest protest of students and people all across this country standing up against gun violence. Then he went to Harvard. I think he graduated early. He started a political path. He's got lots of political opinions. But his resume was incredibly long, and he works with such urgency. And actually reading it, I love, I'm sure you all remember the Hamilton song, and the quote, why do you write like you're running out of time? So I asked David Hogg, I mean, you are working with such incredible urgency at such a young age. And he explained to me how his life has been deeply changed by, obviously, a fight he did not pick, a situation that he did not choose to have happen to him. And he is now living his life like he's not sure if he actually is going to have that much time, which is heartbreaking. And I'm thinking, all I could say to him in this moment as he was explaining this to me was that I am sorry. I am sorry for what has happened to him and his sister. I'm sorry for what's happening in this country. And now we're reflecting on this obviously happening over and over again in this country. And it's been mentioned. You know, we know about Parkland. We're just beyond the 13th anniversary of Sandy Hook. But I know you've all seen the statistics and websites. There are now hundreds of these events every year in our country. And this is not, you know, we see the incidences of violence in other parts of the world, but it doesn't happen here in America. So just a week ago, when this Brown shooting happened, you know, we all started to get the text alerts, and I have a group of friends from Brown who I stay in close touch with, and we're on this ongoing text chain. And I have actually 3 different friends from college who have kids at Brown right now. And one of those students, one of the daughters, was locked in the basement of the science library, which I think is right next door. I will say I was a political science major, so I'm really proud of all of these really smart math and science majors who spend a lot of time in Barris Hall. I'm embarrassed. I took no classes there. But she was locked in the basement of the science library, and she was there for hours. And another friend was locked in her dorm room, similar to Magnus, and FaceTiming her mom, honestly, for hours. Like, I just need to stay on the phone with you. Heartbreaking. I mean, again, I'm just moved by how hard this is for young people and for parents. And they're all okay. So my mom, one of my friends, she showed up to be reunited with her daughter. The others are now home, like Magnus, and the others who spoke. And we are now in a place where thousands of new kids have had to experience something that David Hogg had to experience, that others had to experience, and feeling this incredible situation of heartbreak. So I graduated from Brown in 1998. It was actually a year before Columbine. And honestly, when I was there, it was a complete situation of safety. Except actually my car was stolen twice at Brown. But otherwise, it was a place where I never worried about gun violence. And I came from a very, very small town in Maine. And I never worried about gun violence where I grew up. But now I'm actually the mom of 2 kids. They're 13 and 14. And I spent some time serving on the school board in my small town. And about 15 years ago, when I was on the school board, we started debating the policy of lockdowns and how we were going to lock our school. And at that time on the school board, I live in a town of 400 people. It's an offshore island. I was like, we don't have to do this. But the other people on the school board watching what was happening in this country were like, no, we do have to do this. And the local sheriff came and talked about what the kind of protocols we needed at the school. And so we enacted this policy that now every school in the state of Maine now has about how you're going to practice for gun violence, how you're going to practice for shootings, how you're going to practice for bad people entering your kids' school. And now my own kids have had to practice, which again, it's heartbreaking. And my friends who were on this Brown text said, actually, all of this practice that these kids have had actually saved lives. Saved lives in Harrison Hawley. Kids knew exactly what to do. They knew where to go. They knew where to run. They knew what to have in their backpacks. But honestly, this is not how it should be in this country. So I am incredibly happy for the progress that we've now made in Maine, and I'm so grateful to everyone in this room who's worked so hard on the victories we've had. The victory we had this past November, the now ghost gun law going into law, which is good news. It will happen next year. But we know there is so much more we need to do in this country that we need to commit to make sure that we don't have military-style weapons in our society, that we don't have guns in the hands of criminals, that we protect kids from guns in their own home, that we live in a society where we care about our neighbors and that our kids and our students and our churches are not fearing for gun violence. So again, I will just say that I am so sorry to the students who now have to live in this society. You have to live with this fear in your communities, in your schools. And as somebody who is involved in public life, you should expect much, much more from us. So again, in the honor and the memory of these incredible students who have been lost, we recommit ourselves to doing much more. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Shenna. It is now my great pleasure to invite Dr. Nirav Shah, the former director of the Maine CDC, up to provide some reflection on this moment.
Weeping may endure through the night, but hope cometh in the morning. After the darkness of the past week, there must be hope. To the families of Ella and Mukhammad, to the 9 students still recovering from their wounds, and to the entire Brown University community, our hearts are with you. There are no words sufficient to cover the silence that's left by the loss of a sophomore who loved the piano and a freshman who dreamed of becoming a brain surgeon. No words capture the sorrow we feel for those who went in for a review session and left with a lifetime of trauma. We extend our condolences to the people of Rhode Island. As we in Maine know, the experience of trauma is collective. What happens to one of us is experienced by all of us. Trauma is this ghost. It follows us in every room. It's a weight that does not get lighter when shared by many. Here in Maine, we know this feeling with wrenching familiarity. We remember the dark pall that fell over our own streets more than 2 years ago. And we recognize that same hollow ache in Providence now. When a community is shattered, a crack runs through all of us. This is, sadly, the new normal that none of us asked for and that none of us should accept. The cruel geometry of time means that this atrocity occurred just one day before the shooting at the anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting. Think about that. We have so many mass shootings in this country that we hold vigils for the newly slain at the same time that we light lights and candles for those who were taken 13 years ago. An even more damning indictment of the current reality we face, as others have mentioned, is the fact that at least 2 of the survivors at Brown were experiencing their second school shooting. To survive one such event is a miracle. To face it twice in a lifetime is systemic failure. There have been more mass shootings in the United States this year alone than there have been days that have elapsed on the calendar. That there will be another mass shooting is predictable, and what is predictable is preventable. If this were any other consumer product, a car, a toy, a medication, that were causing such a recurring cycle of mass casualty events, the response would be definitive and forceful. Decades ago, when motor vehicle deaths spiked, we didn't just mourn, we took action and made cars safer. When paint and gas containing lead was found to stunt brain development in children, we didn't just shrug our shoulders, we took action. When cigarettes were linked with cancer, We didn't just say, well, that's a choice. We took action. Even more recently, when crib bumpers were linked with suffocation, we took action and banned them nationwide. And now, with firearm-related injuries as the #1 cause of death for children and teenagers in the United States, we should not look the other way. We should take action. Because nothing changes if nothing changes. We must stop treating mass shootings like unpredictable lightning strikes, but rather as the predictable result of policy action or inaction. The inertia at the federal level has shifted the burden of courage to the states. In Maine, we are indeed seeing legislative evolution, progress, if not perfection. The thing is, change is not the result of just one big thing happening. It's the result of scores of building blocks that, when assembled, represent an edifice of change. Our flags here in Maine have gone from yellow to red. We've added 72 hours between a moment of violent intent and the means to access a weapon. But there is more to be done. We must acknowledge that while we cannot legislate away evil, we can certainly legislate away the ease through which it is executed. Now, the outpouring of support for Brown has spanned state lines and political divides. And to the people of Brown and Rhode Island, we've got your back here in Maine. We will continue to push for a morning when hope is not just the response to darkness, but the foundation of our safety. In a world where dawn brings not just peace, but also reprieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaw. I now have the pleasure of inviting up Representative Poppy Arford. She's the representative of Maine House District 101.
Welcome again to everybody to State House District 101. The primary reason I am extremely grateful to stand before you right now is to tell you that you are, my belief, is that you and we collectively are the solution. And the biggest message I have, because I struggle with this myself, having someone who has been committed to gun safety and violence prevention for as long as I can remember, and certainly through my 5 years in the state legislature, is that we cannot surrender the belief that we can make a difference. During World War II, there's a book written called The Finality of Evil, because evil became commonplace. People were carted away, they were sent to concentration camps, and in many parts of the world there was no resistance, or very little resistance to that. And I see the exact same thing happening today in our country regarding gun violence. It's the banality of the evil of gun violence has become so commonplace that a lot of the people I know that are not legislators, that are not politically inclined at all, when they pick up the paper and see the next headline, they put it down. It's so painful because they believe that there's nothing they can do to make a difference. So, first of all, there's 2 more speakers after the students have a lot more important things to say than me, so I'm going to cut this short. Because the students are the important ones right now, because they're the ones that organized this. I want to make that very clear. It was Shawn and other students who went to the Maine Gun Safety Coalition and asked them for help. And of course, the amazing organization, the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, stepped up and said, of course, we are there with you. We're going to make this happen with you. But it was the students. No one else anywhere in Maine did anything publicly to resist what just happened in Brown. or in Australia. So, my message to you is to do something. Figure it out. Figure out what you can do that you're comfortable doing to put an end to the gun violence that we're experiencing in our country today. Because I know each one of us has something we can do. You can start by joining the Maine Gun Safety Coalition. You can start by talking to your elected person and saying, are you a gun safety and violence prevention advocate? And if they say yes, say, what are you going to do? And if they say no, say, well, if you want my vote, we're going to have to talk about this. Because I'm not comfortable with that. So, I just want to end this, my little spiel today, by just thanking you for showing up today. You're fighting against that urge, that voice that's saying, there's nothing I can do to make a difference, because you showed up today. And I'm absolutely sure that your being here today is going to make a difference in your life and in the people around you, because you are doing something to fight that untruth that there's nothing you can do to make a difference. You showed up today and you will do something to make a difference. I'm fully confident of that, and I'd love you to contact me and tell me what that's going to be. Thank you so much, and well, I just want to say the next two students, including Shawn, that are about to speak, are the people that are giving me in this moment profound hope and joy that we will achieve a world free of senseless, avoidable, and preventable gun violence. Thank you.
I now have the privilege to invite up my dear friend Lianna Holden. Lianna has been organizing with me on this issue since 2023. She's heavily involved with Students Demand Action, and she is going to reflect upon this moment.
Hi everyone, my name is Lianna Holden, as Shawn mentioned. I am a sophomore that attends Tono College all the way in California. I'm home for winter break. I just kind of wanted to walk through the way that gun violence has really followed teens of my age throughout their life. First, from Maine, I've grown up here. I went to Freeport High School. I've lived in Lewiston for the past few years. We had the series of hoax threats to schools. That is what really started my involvement in Students Demand Action. That is what started the chapter at my local high school, Freeport High School. Fast forward just a little bit, that's when we were struck by the tragedy of the Lewiston mass shooting. I know that this is something near and dear to many of our hearts. I remember the instant pit and fear that I felt living in Lewiston at the time when this happened. And I think that familiar pit has really consisted and followed, and I'm sure it's something that unfortunately multiple people in this room have felt and had to experience, if not once, but multiple times throughout their life. We also had a hoax at my school in Claremont, California. So I was on my way to dinner with a group of friends, hoping to get some poke at the dining hall, when a campus security officer races past us, yells at us to just turn around, go back. You're not allowed to head north. Do not go to the dining hall. You cannot head past this point. Obviously, they don't tell us why. We're completely confused. So on our way back to the dorm where they told us to go and quarantine and find shelter, fearful, confused, helicopters overhead. No one knows what's going on. You're trying to check every source you can, whether it's Biz or your friends or what resources you have to figure out what's going on. And that kind of invited a conversation with my friends. There were about 8 of us in this room, in this one dorm room together, hoping for everyone's safety. It was about 7 or 8 of us. Out of all of us, at least 3 of us have already had personal encounters with shootings. That is nearly half the room of my friends at a small liberal arts school. This kind of violence is something that is persisting throughout our lives. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's stopping. It's yet another year in a row where there are more mass shootings in the year than there are days. I believe it's like 7th year or something like that.
C- on the deferred report card this year. They are a pack that also focuses on gun safety work. I personally would never be happy receiving a C-. There is proof that there is so much more work we need to do as a state for policy to prevent more tragedies like this from happening. And Mainers are proving over and time again that it's something that they want. It's something that they care about. You see people show up to events like this, to the State House, to provide testimony and to pass these laws that we need, that are common sense to keep our citizens safe. Unfortunately, this Brown mass shooting is the first thing to bring Shawn and I together in quite a while. I just returned home from break, and before I could make plans socially, I was reached out to about helping plan this vigil. It's not fair that this responsibility is put onto us. I feel passionate about this cause, and I will never ever complain about having to do any of this work. But it is such an embarrassment that this is the first time that I'm seeing a friend from high school. We are mourning two young students that had so many hopes and dreams. And I think about my experience at college and what it would mean for this to happen someplace there. In reflection, it somehow made me grateful to have to spend an all-nighter working on a 15-page final paper, because I had the luxury to do that in the safety of my dorm on a safe campus where I didn't have to worry about this. It's always a worry, but I was able to go through this struggle that so many students who normally wouldn't choose to deal with violence didn't have to, because they were struck by yet another tragedy that could have easily been prevented. And I want to leave with one thing. Violence, unfortunately, has really followed many of us. And the one thing that we need is really action, not just at the state level, at the national level too. And it's important that everyone continues to do the work. It's clear that everyone here has a personal connection and a care for this cause, so that action does not stop now, it only continues.
Thank you so much, Nina. And as she reflected upon, this is the event that brought us back together, but it's also the event that brought Lauren and I back together. I had the privilege of meeting Lauren back in 2023, and I've had the privilege of following her journey on social media, but it really is a tragedy that this is the event that has brought us back together. Like Lianna, I too started this journey in organizing around gun safety after the Hopes event took place back in 2022. I organized a demonstration at the Capitol, and we had more legislators present than we did students, and I think that's an important point. Students are tired. There is a great level of desensitization that students are facing, and it makes it really hard to show up. But looking at the picture of Mukhammad and Ella, us as students recognize the importance of showing up, because showing up is an act of resistance in and of itself, especially for students today. Receiving texts about mass shootings never gets easier. I remember back freshman year when I was studying in New York City, I received a text from Lianna, who is a resident of Lewiston. And the text was, "There's an active shooter, and it is serious." Words can't possibly describe what I felt in that moment. The dissonance and the feeling that is felt when you are miles away from community, your friends, your loved ones, and you don't know if they're going to be okay. And in that moment, I was on campus, and it was like calm. Everyone there was completely not impacted, but I felt the weight and the grief of the chaos that I knew that was occurring back in my home community. And then last weekend, I felt that chaos and that dissonance again when I received a notification that was sent by the university, alerting the students of the shooting. And I remember checking in on all of my friends. I texted Magnus, I texted a bunch of my friends at Brown, and just reading their responses back, it was so difficult to be so many miles away from the people that I care so deeply about. And receiving those texts never gets easier, and I think it's important for the adults in the room to understand that while social media is a tool that connects us, I'm so grateful to have been in contact with Lauren over so many years. I think it also really brings out a level of collective grief and worry surrounding this issue. There's no turning off social media. Last weekend we were bombarded with post after post after post in relation to this tragedy. And I know there are students in this room who had to delete certain platforms, and I think it's important that just recognizing the aspect of community that students have through social media that is much, much stronger than distant forms of community that students might have had years prior. I think that's really important to recognize. This issue is also really sobering for me as well. I'm a transfer student. I transferred to Bowdoin College sophomore year. But before I transferred to Bowdoin, I committed to Brown. And I was set to matriculate there. And a chain of events led me to not. And last week, I took my Principles of Economics final. And that was the classroom, the review session that the tragedy took place. And assuming that my academic trajectory had lined up, the parallels would have led me to that same review session. And I say that to recognize that we are all here as a result of geographic lottery. We are all here because we are lucky enough to not be in the scenarios where these tragedies occur at such a regular level. And I also think it's important to recognize that gun violence, as many of the legislators, former legislators in this room have recognized, former public health officials have recognized, that gun violence can happen regardless of your status. There's no level of security that you are granted just because you are wealthy or you are in a position of power. Gun violence can impact individuals no matter the circumstances. I know I often have spoken to Magnus and Lianna and others in this room. As a liberal arts student, we often take these really crazy classes. And so Magnus, for example, was taking this crazy chemistry class last semester. And I often get made fun of for taking courses such as transnational families, for example. People are often well, that's an interesting name. Only liberal arts colleges could possibly concoct a course of this nature. But I was reflecting upon my time in these courses, and I was thinking back to Dr. Shah's comment earlier about how other issues are seen as much more urgent. And Dr. Shah had reflected on lead, and that brought me back to my environmental policy class, where we deeply discussed the issue that took place in Flint, Michigan, and how there was such a great level of inaction there at the time because that community was predominantly black. And I think that's important to recognize. It is so amazing to see all of your faces here today, but we can not only show up when we feel as though we have a personal connection, when it's a predominantly white institution being impacted, when it's an institution that has a grand amount of wealth and recognition. We must show up consistently and constantly because this is an issue that is deeply racialized and one that legislators have turned their backs on in communities where they feel as though there isn't a significant emphasis to carry out change. As Martin Luther King Jr. said in a letter from Birmingham jail, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I appreciate Reverend Alicia for bringing Dr. King up because I think that's also very important to recognize. We're here as students at different institutions, Pomona, Boston University, Brown, Bowdoin, because we recognize that this issue can take place anywhere and that none of us are protected when some students are at risk. And that leads me to the next point, where there are many groups of individuals in this room. To the students who showed up today, thank you. I'm deeply grateful, and I know that this is not even remotely a scenario where we had hoped to reunite. And I hope that this room has allowed you to feel a presence of support, comfort, and collective grief. But more importantly, or maybe less importantly, but also of recognition, are the legislators, both current and former, public health officials, officials in government who are present today. And I hope that this moment allows you to reflect upon your plans for taking action and places an emphasis in recognition of Ella, Mukhammad, and other students in this room. There's resistance through speaking at these events and gathering in community, and for students coming together and placing an emphasis on the necessity for change. But there's also a form of resistance that comes through legislative action. And I hope if there's one thing that you take away from this event today, it is that change is necessary for moving forward, and that students deserve a safe place of learning. I hope that we can walk away from this ceremony honoring the lives of Ella Cook and Muhammad Aziz Umurzokov through change. Please know that students are watching, and we expect that that change occurs moving forward. Thank you so much. I would now like to welcome up Reverend Alicia to conclude our event.
Thank you, Shawn, for the reminder of intersectionality. As a Latina, and the first Latina who has served this church, and as a United Methodist, I assure you that this community here is committed to supporting the students and the community as we respond to our call as a people of faith to urge others to advocate at the local and national level for laws that prevent and reduce gun violence. I often say that I look forward to a day that I have preached myself out of a job, because it means that we have reached a point where a deep, abiding peace and justice is no longer something that we need to remind people to work toward, but it has become a reality in our lifetime. Which is why it is important for us to remember that as this vigil ends, our work, the work of light, does not. As we leave this place, may we carry the names and the stories that we have heard. May we remember the lives that have been lost, the lives that have been forever changed, and may we find ourselves forever changed by knowing these stories. May we know courage instead of fear. May we know solidarity instead of silence, and may we embrace hope instead of despair. So, beloved community, go from this place carrying your light into the world and know that love is stronger than fear. Go knowing that the hope you hold is an act of defiance in the face of a world that is determined to rob us of it. Go knowing that the future is still being written and that you hold the light that we write in. You hold that in your hands. Go, do, be, and see how that can transform the world. May it be so. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.